Hi everyone, Phyrexian Public Library here, and welcome to our first ever YouTube video in which we will briefly explain our homebrewed Mini-EDH style format called Clash. Before diving into the rules and the differences with traditional EDH, let's talk about what you need. So you're going to need a commander, you're going to need 10 spells, and then finally you're going to need 10 lands. Clash begins with EDH rules and legality as a baseline. You're going to use a 21 card singleton library, including your commander. Your library will be divided into spells and lands, starting life total of 20 with no separate commander damage tracking, no decking out, an additional land step on each of your turns, and a commander tax of 1. If you were to draw a card from your library and there are no cards remaining, 2 steps will occur in order. First, your graveyard will be shuffled into your library, and second, cards you own in exile will be shuffled into your graveyard. If and when this occurs, this essentially counts as your draw. So in other words, you will be unable to draw a card until a card effect allows you to do so, or until your next draw step. Though they are separate, your land library and your spell library should each just be shuffled as normal, and obviously a cut can be made available to your opponent for each library. And now we're ready to begin. So I've got Tiny Bones the Pickpocket from Outlaws of Thunder Junction as my commander here. I've got my 10 spells, and I've got my 10 lands. Your opening hand is going to consist of 3 spells and 1 land, and your maximum hand size for this game will be set to 5. And just as any other format in Magic, you'll have to discard a hand size if you're over this amount at the end of your turn. Clash is casual, so each player is permitted 1 free mulligan without penalty. It doesn't really matter how you determine who goes first. We typically do high roll as the person on the play, but the player going first will not get an initial draw step, but they'll still get a land step, which will be important. So what is a land step? The land step can be defined as adding the top card of your land library to your hand. It's important to know that this is not a draw. You're not drawing this land. It's simply added to your hand. If for whatever reason you are unable to add a land to your hand with your land step, nothing special happens. This step was simply designed so that you're never flooded and you always have a land available. Whenever you draw a card, you'll always draw from your spell library. The same is true for Scry, Reveal, and other similar effects that involve manipulating the top card of your library. The spell library will be given priority. If a card searches for another card, the library that is searched will depend on the targets of said card. If a card does not specify or has both land and non-land eligible targets, the spell library will be searched. Again, it gets priority. For example, Vampiric Tutor has any eligible target, so it must search the spell library. Evolving Wilds only has eligible land targets, so it's got to search the land library. For this reason, tutoring is not nearly as essential in Clash as it is in traditional EDH. Note that you have to have 21 cards, so this means you have to have exactly 10 spells in your spell library. This size constraint means that you have to make the most of these slots, and you don't have a ton of extra room for complex combos or common EDH engines. So what works well? In our playtesting, coverage is key. You gotta devote 2 to 3 spell slots for interaction or removal, but the rest of your cards should follow along a nice curve. You gotta make the most of your 10 lands, and the commander selection is absolutely critical. One common question that comes up is, what happens when I cast something like a Harmonize and I only have 1 card in my library? The answer is, you would draw that 1 card, and then your graveyard would be shuffled into your library, and cards you own in exile would be shuffled into your graveyard. In this sense, this sort of stops your ability to draw additional cards with this effect. Additional house bans can be determined by your playgroup as new combos and decks are formulated, but as a standard rule, cards with repeatable or mass exile effects are super punishing. Milling, hand disruption when combined with these effects is particularly difficult to overcome, as some of our base bans demonstrate. Make it make sense, use your best judgment, test and try out all of your favorite niche builds or half-baked EDH decks and see what works best. Through our playtesting, we found that this format was actually a little bit more rigid than we originally anticipated. It's made for some fun games and makes for a great EDH playground. Listed here are our base bans. If you've been listening to this whole video, some of these definitely make sense to you. You've probably been thinking about some of these. Things like Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, these mass exiling cards like Leyline of the Void, Dothy Voidwalker, some milling cards as well. Ragavan, of course, is on here. And then cards that just like aren't fun, like Sensei's Divining Top, Elixir of Immortality, just artifacts that take advantage of the basic structure of Clash as a format. But at the end of the day, there are tens of thousands of cards that work great for Clash. You can take all those cards that didn't quite make it into the EDH decks, build 21 card Clash decks, grab your buddies, and just sit down and play. Whether 1v1 or multiplayer, Clash is a format that is highly strategic. It's going to force you to brew in new creative ways, and the games are guaranteed to reach a critical point every time. So I absolutely encourage everybody to give it a shot. Let me know how it goes, and thanks for watching.